Hi, everybody. Um, I'm Chris Cloyd from the Donner Party Mountain Runners. This is a part of our webinar series that is teed off this year. It's been really neat to be able to share stories of our members and friends and family and what have you. Today we've got Katie Arnold here. She is not a Donner Party Mountain Runner to my knowledge, but it's really cool to be able to share her story. I personally found out about her through her writing with Outside magazine. But she has been the overall champion at the Leadville Trail 100 and dozens of other races. It's really a remarkable palmarès. She's here today to talk about a copy of, she's here today to talk about her book, Running Home, which chronicles her kind of accidental discovery of ultra running as a way to process grief. And a ton of else. I'm gonna let Katie unpack it better than I can. But it really, the snippets that I've been able to read and the press that I've read about it, it seems just tremendous. Again, I'm familiar with Katie's writing from Outside and was really impressed with that. If you're not a Donner Party Mountain Runners member, you can go to donnerpartymountainrunners.com and sign up. That gives you all sorts of perks, memberships, including things like this webinar. If you have not picked up a copy of Running Home yet and live here in North Lake Tahoe, you can pick one up at Word After Word Books, some friends of ours, and kind of learn more about Katie from there. I'm interested to learn more about Katie from here now. How are you today, Katie?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, Chris, and thanks for that great intro. Yeah, so do you want me just to start in?
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful.
Board,
yeah, I would say on behalf of our club, it's just, we're grateful to have your company today. You're the first, you're the inaugural non-member. You're the first non-member to have you on one of these.
I'm thrilled. And have you been doing these mostly virtual then since the pandemic, or
Yes, yeah. This whole series was born out of necessity. We had some social events planned with films and speakers and stuff, but the pandemic had other plans, so we pivoted.
Well, that I will say is like the lemonade from the pandemic is seeing how many people are learning to be so nimble and creative and innovative with what the circumstances have thrown at us. And I'm so impressed by how people still manage to come together even when we can't physically gather. And, you know, that goes so much with the virtual races I've been seeing and ways that runners can come together, you know, when we can't race. And I don't know about you all out in California, I would suspect it's much like the same here, which is we're not racing. I did one race this summer in Utah at Bears Ears, but you know, we're not gathering. I can't really leave the state because my kids are actually in school and I need to preserve that. Otherwise they'd have to quarantine if I left. And so it's just been a real time to sort of turn, you know, circle the wagons and like turn inward. And I miss the connections. Someone was asking me, I did a book event like this last week, and they said, well, are you doing virtual races? And I'm not, but I'm so admire people who are. For me, I don't really race. I mean, the competition is the smallest reason why I run. And it's really sort of an inward journey. Running is very much a writing process for me. It's a creative process, how I write. And it's a way to come together. And so I was like, well, without the coming together, I don't really want to chase my watch all day, right? Life is short enough. Why rush through it? And so, but this is such a fun way. And I've been really excited to do book tour this way. Because I don't have to get on a plane.
Yeah.
You know, I can be down, you know, my kids are downstairs and I'm just on book tour while my husband is making dinner. So.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned being a mother, and I knew about your work writing your Raising Rippers column about kids, and I would imagine, just as you mentioned it, being able to stay at home and do a book tour with a family is a very big deal. I mean, my wife and I are no kids, no pets, so it's much easier if we had a book to do that. But that's remarkable.
Yeah, no, it's the first book tour I did for the hardcover was like the classic kind of travel grind, in and out of cities, like trying to keep the budget low, crashing on couches, and so you know, it's the silver lining of this awful time. I don't mean to make light of it, because I know there's so many people who are suffering. And, you know, my family and I, fortunately, knock on wood, as of now, have not been touched directly by the virus, and our work is stable. But I know so many people are in much more precarious places. So I just want to honor them for a moment, because, you know, running can seem like this frivolous or self-indulgent pursuit, which for a million reasons I disagree with. But in a time like this, sometimes even I feel like, oh, is this really, should I be going? You know, when I did that race in Utah in June, I really grappled with, is this ethically the right thing? And I think it's forcing us just to be mindful about all our decisions with each decision. And that's not a bad thing at all, to just tune in and be less sort of rushing headlong. And we Americans love like that instant gratification, or let's just do it. But this is causing, you know, forcing us to slow down a little.
Yeah, it's forcing a little bit of consideration of other people too, which is, I think, is,
Oh,
again, like I would not say that traveling to race was a risky proposition or something of any of that sort. But it's, you know, I think that it's forcing a lot of people to be empathetic, even if they do disagree with other people's decision making, just because there's no map right now. Everybody's doing
no
their
map, and everyone has a different threshold. And yeah, so it's just great to be here and be able to talk to such a diverse group of runners. I've been chatting with runners from Texas and DC and New Jersey, and so any club with the word mountain in the title is like after my own heart, because I'm a mountain runner at heart. And yeah, and so I'll just tell a little bit about my story. I think what I'll do is share kind of the background of running home, and how it came to be, and then open it up to questions. So everyone who's listening, I'm a super open person. You can ask me about running, training, grief, you know, mothering, parenting, adventure, all that stuff. And just, I guess they put it in the chat box, or
Yeah, there's a chat box and a Q&A box. I'm not sure what is preferable, but I'll check them both. I'm sure you can check them both. I think
yeah.
if I was asking the folks following along, maybe Q&A makes more sense, given that.
Okay, I see that box.
But
Um,
if you send them, we'll get to them.
yeah, and then one other thing, please, if you haven't bought a copy of the book, please support your local bookstore. Word after word.
Yep.
Bookstores are a real heart of our communities, and they have been obviously under threat by online retailers like Amazon. And so please, we need our bookstores. Please buy locally. Even if you don't buy running home, support your shop. And one last note is that if afterwards you'd like me to sign a copy of the book, I have book plates for you, and I can inscribe them as, you know, just send, I guess, Chris or Jack your how you want it inscribed and your mailing address, and I'll pop one in the mail. And I love signing books for people, and I can't do it in person, but I'll do it by mail.
Those of you following along, if you are a Donner Party Mountain Runners member, you can go onto our website and email us there, and we will make sure that we get you connected with Katie and get that going for you.
Great. So yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about running home. It, as Chris mentioned, is a story about my journey through both grief and losing my father, and a journey into long distance running. And the two sort of ran parallel for me, and then led me into a competitive pursuit of, you know, some of the biggest races. And the story really begins in 2010, when I learned that my father, who was 73 at the time, was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And I had just given birth to my second daughter. She was a newborn. So I had, you know, my baby was growing as fast as my father was dying. And it was this sort of like crazy, you know, diagram of loss and love happening. And I was kind of caught in the middle. And my father and I had been very, very close, even though we didn't have a conventional father-daughter relationship, in that I didn't grow up living with him. He and my mother split when I was quite young. And so I didn't see him, but maybe 4 or 5 times a year. It was a different time. It was the late 70s, early 80s when, you know, that was what divorce was like. You might not, like, we moved away to New Jersey and my dad was in Virginia. And so we had this physically distant relationship, but my father was one of the most present people that I've ever known. I now that I'm sort of become a student of Zen, and I see that he's like this accidental, almost like Zen master, because he was always present, and he wanted to know what you were thinking, feeling, you know, he cared. He was all in when he was with you. And he was a photographer for National Geographic. So he traveled the world taking photographs. And one of his greatest gifts to me was that he taught me how to pay attention in the world, or how to be awake, right? We would call that now, in our lives. And his medium was photographs and mine was words, because I knew from a very early age, probably right around the time I started running, which was 7, that I wanted to be a writer. And so my dad was this fantastic role model for being a creative person in the world. And he was quite unassuming in his character. And so he was never the center of attention. He was what a good photographer is. He sort of disappeared behind his camera and let the camera tell the story. And so much of sort of who I became as a writer, I think I owe to my father and his way of being an artist in the world. And so he was of great influence to me there. And he also really helped me discover the outdoors. And we would go on hikes and little expeditions and bike trips and river trips. And so I was very, very close to him. So when he was diagnosed, it was, you know, profound grief that came over me. And it was not only grief, but it was also sort of this postpartum, you know, I was just had a baby. I was kind of in that fog. I write in Running Home, I describe it as this double bubble, right? Like grief is its own bubble. And, you know, for those of you listening, I'm sure many of you have experienced grief. It puts you in this sort of cocoon where the real world outside is moving at a different pace, and everything is sort of hyper sharp inside, but very unreal. And new motherhood or new parenthood is a lot like that. You know, the world's moving fast and you're forced to slow down. And it's not a bad thing. It's actually a rare time in life where you step outside the main flow of time. And so I was in both of those, like a double bubble of sort of just this fog. And my dad passed away after only 10 weeks. So it was very quick. And it was traumatic in that it was so fast, but I was able to go back several times to Virginia to visit him. And I took Maisie, my infant, and just tried to be there and sort of be witness to what he was going through. And so a lot of that I write about in Running Home, that process of watching someone you love fade away. And yes, it's intensely painful, but it was also, I write about this, that it was strangely beautiful too. And its own kind of flow state. You know, as athletes and runners, we talk about being in flow where everything seems to click and time drops away and we're hyper alert. And that's not dissimilar to being with someone when they're dying. And so it was a gift, even though it was a horribly painful one. And, you know, there's not a day goes by that I wish that my dad, he'd be 83 now, which still sounds young to me. I mean, 73 seems crazy young now. And I think how much he'd love to see his granddaughters. And, but anyway, so he was dying. And when he was dying, I had this very strange experience with grief, which I knew it was an emotional state. You know, your heart hurt, you were sad, but I didn't realize it was physical. And it's a physical process. And my body took it on. And so that I hurt with it, right? It felt like this physical weight on me and aches in my body. And what happened in my grief is that it turned into anxiety. And so that I was sure that I was dying too. And it was probably 18 months of this hyper anxiety, which I'm sure was kind of exacerbated by postpartum. But I was sure I was dying of something different every other week, you know, and it sounds comical now, but when you're in it, you think it's really happening, and like, oh my God, my elbow hurts, it must be cancer. Or, you know, my husband, who's infinitely patient and has such a great sense of humor, I'd be like, oh, my head is tingling, and he would have some perfect line that would for a moment put me at ease, but then it would come roaring back, the anxiety, the worry. And part of, you know, being a writer is I have a very, you know, lively imagination that's very much my friend when I'm a writer. And, you know, it's a great tool and has been with me my whole life. But when you're in this sort of grief state and in heightened anxiety, that imagination can turn against you. And you know, I was fabricating these, you know, elaborate, improbable scenarios of how I would die and orphan my children. And I didn't know it at the time, but that's not an uncommon grief response. Number one is taking on the persons you love, their pain. That's not uncommon. And having a heightened sense of your own mortality, obviously, is a natural, you know, I understand that it's a natural kind of offspring of grief. But it was it was, you know, 18 months. And because I live in Santa Fe, and I think that you all living where you do can appreciate this too, like there's lots of natural healers in Santa Fe. And I'm a super open person. So I tried them all, you know, I tried every form of, you know, therapy and acupuncture, and some things worked. Acupuncture worked really well, and other things didn't work and backfired horribly. And I write about that in the book as well, that sort of searching process for something that's going to make me feel better, you know, stop that like ticker tape parade of like terror in my brain. And so the thing that worked best is the thing that's really worked my whole life, which was running. And I have been a runner since I was 7. I've always thought of myself as a runner. And I get this a lot on book tour. People will say, well, I'm not a real runner like you, or I'm not, you know, and they'll discount the running they do. And I always say, like, if you run, no matter how far, how fast, on what terrain, where, you are a runner. And I've always thought of myself as a runner, even though my running started out, and this is one of my favorite sections of the book, is I write about my first race, which is a total lark accident. I was visiting my dad at his farm in Virginia, and he was like, hey, what about running a 10K? And my dad was not an athlete, right? He was an adventurer, an explorer. He was an artist. He was not like into like clocking fast times, but he suggested it. And as a kid who lived away from her dad, and, you know, like, I'm sure I wanted to impress him. And I was a game kid, and I was like, okay. And so he didn't actually run the race. This is the funniest part. He's like, I'm going to be at the finish line with the camera and taking your photos, and you and your sister are going to run the race. And, you know, I'd grown up with him as a photographer, so this made total sense to me. But now in hindsight, I'm like, would I have sent my 7-year-old daughter 6 miles on a country road, you know, running to fend for herself? And so my sister and I ran the race. It was like hilarious and agonizing and the worst thing ever. And then, of course, when you cross the finish line, it becomes the best thing ever. And that was the day I think I identified as a runner, even though then I didn't race competitively as a child. Like, no one forced me into it. It was the 80s. I love this about this. This is one of my favorite things about my dad. He was never like, hey, are you going to, you know, join the track and cross country? And like, why aren't you getting faster? And he was just like, he let me have my own relationship with running. It was a different era. Parents didn't voice their ambitions on their kids the way we do now. And so I was able to sort of develop like a private relationship with running that was very much from the get-go linked to my writing. And so I discovered just by chance as a kid in my suburban neighborhood in New Jersey, you know, like not a wild landscape at all, but that when I moved my body, I could move my mind. And like I could tap into that sort of inner wildness just by riding my bike around the block a bunch of times and getting my heart rate up and pretending I was Harriet the Spy and like gathering clues. And I learned, and I discovered that link early, that being in motion fed me creatively. And so for me, running and writing have always been very closely linked. And so all that is by way of saying that when my dad died and I was so much in grief, the natural place for me to go was out into nature on my own 2 feet. Again, because my father had instilled in me that love for being outside, and not in that sort of like aggro way that we do now of like crushing things, or even my column for outside. Like I really I sometimes have a lot of trouble with the name Raising Rippers. It's so outside, and I came up with it because it was like, I knew it would suit them. But it's like, I don't really want my kids to like rip or crush. I want them to like have a relationship, like an intimacy with the outdoors and with themselves in the outdoors. And my dad just did that accidentally. I think because he was just that kind of like laid back person. He was not competitive. And so I got to have this really sort of pure and private thing with running. Sometimes I think like, oh, why didn't I compete? And how, like, maybe I could have been really good. And, and I get a little sad. And I didn't, because my sister, who's older than me, and I write about this too in the book, in that sort of that warped logic of like a 10-year-old who's like her older sister, who's 6 feet tall and like scary, starts doing the thing, like the track and cross country. And I'm like, back off. That's her thing. I'm not touching that. So I didn't race, partly because she'd gotten there first, and I wouldn't have a chance against her. And so I think about like, oh, what if I'd run more, and competed and gotten super serious about it. And then recently I had this revelation that like, maybe I still wouldn't be running in my 40s with as much like heart and passion for it if I'd, just run myself into the ground as a teenager. And so I came to racing kind of late. I mean, I did that race, that 10K every year in Virginia, and I have like 1 million pottery cups. Like I did get better and faster, and my sister and I would win our age groups. And I have some like lumpy pottery cups. Like right here's one from 1985, to show for it. But that was just kind of a lark. It was like, I never trained. I would show up. And so, but when my dad died and I was in that thick fog of grief, I just made sense to go into nature. And I've always been a trail runner since I moved to Santa Fe 25 years ago. The mountains are where I find solace. Running in a way, even before my dad died, was like after I had kids and it was difficult to find time to get out the door. Running was the easiest, simplest way to go to get into nature. It was really sort of a practical thing. Like I was a big time mountain biker. I loved riding my bike. I write about my bike in the book as a vehicle of sort of creative freedom and inspiration. But, let's be honest, when you have a newborn and a toddler, like I'm not going to be fixing flats on my bike. Like I had babies to maintain. I could not maintain my bicycle. And I'm a minimalist too. So I was like, I just went deeper into running because it was sort of a convenient thing. And so my dad's death just propelled me deeper into that wilderness place. And running became like a moving meditation. And I'm sure many of the people listening feel the same, is that, when we run, for me at least, when I start out, I have like the long to-do list in my brain. I have the worries like, oh, is my ankle going to feel okay? Or what about my knee that's been hurting? And you sort of, it can put you into that worry mind. But then after you've been out there for, it varies, like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, those sort of fade away into that repetitive motion of your body. And so your body takes over with its knowing, and your mind can take a break. And that's what I was discovering. The longer I went, the sooner I got into that space of no worry. And when you're consumed by worry, like I was, to find moments or, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours in your day where you didn't have them, it was like, oh my God, I need more. And so I was running farther and farther. And I sort of popped out of that intense grief period after about 18 months. And that's when I I was not running to survive anymore. I was kind of running. People always say, oh, running, aren't you runners always running away from something? I love that question, and it's like, well, some days, yes, I'm running away from my to-do list, or the dishes in the sink, or the new puppy we got that's downstairs that's like super teethy. Yes, I'm running away. But in general, running is for me a vehicle of self-discovery. So I'm running toward myself. I'm running toward my truth as a person, toward the stories that want to be told inside of me as a writer. And so I'm very much running toward, and that was true, kind of, I got through the intense grief and it was like, oh, how much farther could I go? And how much deeper into myself and to my journey can the running take me? And it was never premeditated. This is important to say, that I would write a book. I never thought like, oh, my dad's dying. I'm going to take notes like crazy when he's dying. And then I'm going to start running to get through it. And then I'm going to write a book. That was never, when you're in a grief state, which I think that, a lot of us are in right now, whether or not we've lost someone we love, we're grieving for the way our life used to be before we had to worry about, what's around the next bend. We're grieving for that illusion we had of control. And, that's definitely been dashed for all of us, I think. And it certainly is dashed when you lose someone you love. And so I think that we are grieving. And in that grief state, the movement can propel us from that stagnant fog where you can't see your way forward into sort of a place of clarity. But it's important to say, and I write about this, is that it's okay not to see your way forward. And I didn't for a long time. Like, I don't really think I realized I was writing a book for at least 2 or 3 years after my dad died. And I was writing all the time when I ran. Like, I write in notebooks, so I fill my notebooks. And I would come home from a run and fill my notebooks with memories, right? Because the running was unlocking a lot of memories in me. But I didn't see forward. I couldn't see around the next 2 bends. It is like an ultra marathon, right? You have the highs and lows. You'll hit the wall. You'll be like, I can't do this. And then somehow you keep going. And so, but my point is when we're in that fog, and I think a lot of us are, we're stalled out. There's not races for many of us. Maybe we've lost our motivation. We think we're kind of in this funk. We're actually not. Like, it can be a very generative time. I write about this and I call it kind of being in the eddy in a river, right? You're just spinning. You're not with the current. You're kind of in this backwater. But the eddy can be a really fruitful place if you're patient and you're open. And that's really what my dad had taught me, was just be open. Like, what is the world trying to teach us right now? And what are the signs? And I really go into my racing that way as like a receiver. I have this feeling, and this happened early on in one of my first ultras, maybe even my first one. I had done all the training, but when I say training, like, I didn't have a coach. I didn't track my times. Like, I had done the miles, I thought. So I knew that I had sort of done what I could. And so I showed up at the starting line and I was like, this is so totally new. Like, I am just going to shift into like receiving mode of like, okay, show me what I'm supposed to learn from this. And that, being able to do that, really lets you let go of desired results and gripping onto, attachments of how you want it to go. And it puts you much more easily into that flow state. And I learned that just the first race I did, that if I could switch, I literally think of it as like flipping a switch from like the training, which is like, putting in the effort, like being intentional. I try not to get super attached to goals or results, but like, you do have to show up. I mean, letting go of the goal or the fixating on result is not about being passive. I'm not saying like, just take your foot off the gas and let life happen to you. I mean, it's being intentional with your days, but focusing on those moments as moments rather than like, all you're thinking about is like, I'll use an example, the Leadville finish line and like winning it. I mean, never in a million years did I think I would win Leadville or even focus on that. And so I think about that with races, and it's like, if I can switch to receive, then I'm just open, and whatever happens is the journey and is meant to happen. And I've had some hard races where I'm like, well, that sucked. But then it's like, oh, but it led me to this, or this happened as a result. And so partially, I guess it's mindset and just being open to that whatever happens is going to teach me something. But it's been a really useful tool in ultras where there's so many factors and variables. I mean, that's why we love them, right? It's just like life. Like a million things could go wrong. What did someone tell me before I had my first daughter? She was giving me some parenting advice, which people love to do. And this was the best I'd gotten. And she said, the things you think are going to be easy will be hard about parenting. And the things you think will be hard will be easy. And I love that. I was like, that is so spot on. And same thing with an ultra. If you think going into it, like, I got this nailed, like I ran the North Face 50 a bunch of years ago in California. And I was like, sea level, yeah, bring it. For some reason, I thought like the mountains at sea level would not be steep because it was sea level. What the heck? I mean, there was a ton of vertical. I was so humbled. And, but I love that because it was like, oh, right. Like my body wanted to quit so many times and it was my mind that just got me through it. It's a chapter in Running Home where I'm just like, oh, that was not the race I wanted, but it was definitely the race I needed, of just like, you learn how much your mind can do to sort of pull you through. So yeah, it's been a journey. And I think at the same time that I was really discovering myself and my endurance as an athlete and a mountain runner, where I've always felt at home outside. And that's, you know, partially because my family was just complicated. We were, you know, divorced family, and then we were, you know, a merged family. And so step siblings, and just hard to navigate when you're a kid, especially in that era, you know, when no one's telling you anything, you know, and you're just all of a sudden move a few states and you're, you know, it's the sense of dislocation. And I think that theme pervades the book, of like always just sort of being betwixt and between places, my family, my parents, my mother, my father, our two homes, and not having that home. And then realizing, oh, that home is me, you know, and running home to myself. And the book, as I'm going through my grief and after my father died, like I had this very interesting experience of learning more who he was. And because of who he was as a photographer, he left an incredible archive behind. We knew that he would, of photographs, all his photographs for National Geographic. And he was an award-winning photographer, and, you know, hundreds of thousands of photographs of our life together. And one of my favorite things is that I included some of his photographs in the book. So if you haven't gotten the book or have listened to it on Audible, which I narrate, I highly recommend getting the book, because my dad's photographs, it's like, one of my best things about it is that I feel like I was able to share just the tiniest bit of how he saw the world in my book. But after he died and I was going through his photographs, we found a lot more material. He was an incredible writer and letter writer, and he kept journals like I do. In fact, he was the one who sort of got me into writing journals, and he would give me these little spiral notebooks every now and then. He's just like, just keep it in your pocket and write whatever down. And I do that, you know, I do it to this day. But I found a lot of material about him and a lot of things that I hadn't known, some of which were quite painful and surprising. And I won't sort of spoil the read for anyone, because that's part of the process of discovering him, but kind of coming to terms with those family secrets that I think a lot of, if not all, families have, and realizing that some of the choices that he made, though painful and I would choose otherwise, really kind of made him who he was, and as this model of someone who faced his life and his choices and really acknowledged them. I think in this world right now where we have leaders who like will never, you know, on both sides of the aisle, like never be accountable. That is the one thing my dad was, accountable, you know, and he made some unpopular decisions and yet he faced them. And people ask me sort of what was the big takeaway from writing the book. And I, that's one of them, is that like boy, he really showed his humanity, and humanity in that we're not perfect. No one is perfect. It's like he gave permission for failure and that there's grace and even triumph in failure. Not to say he failed, because he didn't, but he had moments where his choices felt like that. And I think the ultimate takeaway is that actually when we're accountable, whether it's a win or loss, or success or failure, if we face our life in that moment with our whole heart, then that's such a great gift to give to people. So I don't know. I feel like I've been talking a lot. The book's a lot about fathers, daughters, grief, resilience. It's obviously about running, but it wasn't ever conceived as a running book. And which is funny, because a lot of people are like, oh, that running book, or, and I don't actually really read running books. I cite a couple in here that I do read. But, it's been interesting to see how it's received, because for me, it feels very much like a personal memoir of family and truth. And that running is just sort of the through line through it, the vehicle, as it is for so many of us. I think it's sort of the thing that carries us through while we're doing other things. So that's sort of my story. There's lots of other layers to it, but I feel like I've been yakking, and I would love it if people had questions or comments, ask me anything, or just even a comment or whatever.
Thank you, Katie. That was wonderful. I have two, and then again, if you are following live, you can leave a comment or a question in the comments or the Q&A section. I'll let you guys think of your questions and do that while I ask my two, because I wrote two down.
Okay.
And I get to be a part of this, so I'm asking both of them.
Hit me.
You touched on, like ultra running as a way to process grief. Obviously, you touch on it in detail in your book, but I don't know if I've ever thought about it with relation to grief, but I've personally found myself intuitively going into the mountains for scale and perspective.
Yeah.
It kind of lets me unpack that stuff. Did you know that intuitively, or did you come into that as a part of your grief process and then go into seek that?
That is such a great question. I think I knew that intuitively, because I've always been an outdoor athlete. So even before I was, competitively running, I found myself in the outdoors, and I've felt the scale of river canyons. And my husband and I, even before we had kids, but certainly once we had kids, we really try to take them into the wilderness and into nature. And so I felt that scale of like when you're in the Grand Canyon and the rock is so old, right? It's 2 billion years old. I write about this in the book, and it's like, oh my God, it's so old. It's seen everything. And I remember I had that same experience when I was in Yosemite. I was writing a profile about Dean Potter, the base jumper, the late great base jumper. And I was leaving the valley after spending a week with him, and I drove through this sequoia grove, and it was like a holy experience. And I'm not like I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person, but I felt the trees' energy and presence. And so I've always felt that nature is bigger than us in a way that is it's almost like a delicious feeling. We get to be very small, and not an inconsequential way or like a scary way, but like, oh, we fit into something bigger, and nature's big enough to hold my grief or my confusion about the world or my rage, right? Like it can hold it all. It has seen it all. So I say that. And then I also say that nature, we've seen this year, is definitely under siege. And that we as outdoor athletes have a responsibility to step up. And, I don't want to think that nature will always be the way it is, because we're learning that it won't. But I think that it has a permanence to it that is really comforting when we're grappling with our own impermanence. That was a great question.
Well, thank you very much. I know those of us that live here in California, they closed the forests, the national forests within the state of California. It was unprecedented.
Yeah.
And you talk about stepping up to try to make our natural world available and accessible for generations to come. I know when they closed the forest, I really felt like I was out of moves,
I mean, that's sort of the unthinkable, right?
And yeah, it's definitely steadied my focus on trying to contribute to that fight, to make your point, and save places like
Yeah.
this. Um, well, yeah, thank you very much for that. And then I had another question. You talked about your family during the last couple of minutes, but I also I know just from kind of getting acquainted with you through your book that you founded a children's trail running club and
Mhm.
coach a lacrosse team. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So I find that just as because we've connected via running, right? I didn't meet you until today, and we're connecting via running. I guess I didn't come into it from that perspective, but thinking about it as a coach, which I didn't know that you did any coaching. I've worked as a personal trainer and coach for
I mean,
years, so
loose
yeah,
coach.
totally. But coming at it from that side, I've always looked to trying to connect with the youth via coaching or whatever as a way, maybe not to uh, what's the word I'm looking, de-escalate grief or strain, but inspire hope. Maybe like I see so much positive in I might believe it's over for me, but like really good for this kid. And
Yeah.
it changes the way I interact with grief or pain or whatever. And I wondered again, like I very much found myself aware of that and started to skew towards trying to foster more youth as a coach.
Yeah.
And I guess just as an acquaintance, I was just asking, how do you view coaching as a part of
Yeah. Another great question. I mean, it's funny like that you drew those two together because it is true. Like, um, for me, I just want to get kids to feel that connection between their bodies, their minds, and the natural world, right? And to know their physical strength, not with the clock. I'm not into competition for kids. If they want to do it, that's fine. But like this trail running program I started in Canada, super chill at the lake we go to, like someone asked me like, would I train the kids for a 5K? And I was like, well, I'll run with them on the trails, but like, we don't need to train. Like, we're just going to go have fun. So I want kids to feel that. I want them to feel at home in their bodies. And I was really lucky that I always have felt that way. I've always felt my body is my home and that it's also my tool. Like I knew, because I knew it was how I wrote, like I felt that link early. So I've heard from so many women, especially who've never felt at home in their bodies or felt like a disconnect from their body. And I'm so grateful that for whatever reason, like I don't think anyone taught me this, no one was teaching those things then, but I just managed to luck into that experience for myself. So, but I really want my daughters, to feel that way and to feel strong in their bodies. And like we, bike to school, they bike 4 miles each way. Like, again, it's not so they can rip it or be like super fit or then translate it to some kind of race. It's just, I want them to live in their bodies, live there. And then I want them to live outside because that's such a healthy place to be. And as we just discussed, why nature is such a curative, restorative and hope-filled place mostly. And so, and then I want them to feel that connection of when they're outside, moving their bodies in nature, what happens inside and their minds, and they get the ideas. So I'm trying to put that together. I mean, mostly I'm doing it with my girls. It's like an experiment of 2, and they're pretty game. I will say they're pretty game, but I also don't want to force the sports on them, like, because no one forced it on me, and it actually was a really good thing. I've always been a motivated kid. I think being a child of divorce, right? You kind of, you can go one way or the other, but I was always like, hey, look at me, and so yeah, I think that girls, and I think team sports are great. I've written about that for Outside. One of my most read stories was about how, don't let team sports, what is it? Hijack your adventure life. And you can get in that cycle, right? Where you're just at the soccer fields and you're like, wait, the mountains, like we're not hiking, mountain biking. I will say that is one of my, the things about the pandemic, that the silver lining is that we've done so much backpacking this summer, so much hiking. I think team sports are great in moderation. I think they're good for girls especially. And I'm really sad my girls can't play soccer. There's no team sports right now. But yeah, I just try to do my part, and just, I think if it comes from that joyous place of like discovery of ourselves, then it doesn't have to be about, are you winning, are you on the travel select, or are you, the fastest kid in your school? That's a sure way. I mean, when it becomes that, it's extrinsic, right, for the kids rather than intrinsic. And I think when it's intrinsic, you'll do it your whole life, which
Yeah,
is certainly how running is.
that's awesome. You answered that question much more eloquently than I would have dreamed. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, shout out to all the parent coaches and all the coaches, period. It's hard work. I don't know if you've probably watched Ted Lasso, the show.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. I think there's not a better role model in the world for humanity than Ted Lasso. Like, the most positive person, but so real.
Yeah.
So I have a new appreciation for coaches.
Cool. I have a fellow coach that wants to make a how to coach coaches book that's like almost like a preschool coloring book type cover, and then you open it up and it's just one page with one sentence, "You're doing fine," and the rest of it's blank.
I love that. I mean, because it's like, you realize it's such an art to coaching. Like, I'm a low tech runner. I've just started being coached. I barely use my watch. Like, I'm not into metrics at all. Heart rate. Like, I wish I could be. Maybe I'd get a lot faster or something, but like, I'm just not into it. I'm into the feeling of it. But I have such an appreciation for coaches, because you have to do all that. But then mostly you have to do what you just said, or do the Ted Lasso thing, which is like, he didn't know a thing about soccer, but he knows about the human heart. And so he's a good coach.
Yeah, I as somebody that's coached runners, I think that part of coaching is understanding whether your runner is going to be somebody like you and respond to 2 hours fun mountain, send me a summit photo as a training workout, or 5 by 10 at X pace, and understanding how people respond to that and what you can do to put them in a position to succeed in whatever their grander goal is. I'm with you. My goal is to run 2 hours and stand on top of the mountain. It's fine. I'm plenty. That's enough.
Yeah, I know. It's, for me, it's a feeling, but then it's also fun when my coach has me do a hard workout afterwards, you're super pumped because you have this confidence. So it's a fine line. I'm still figuring it out, being coached. I'm such an internal runner that it's tricky to have a coach, because I'm like, well, I have to listen to myself. We should have a conversation offline, because it's like, I need to figure out how to do it, because like, I need to listen to myself, but he can bring so much to the equation. But also, like, the minute I see something on a list or a spreadsheet, like, I'm going to do the opposite. And I have that like rebel side, or I don't know what it is, but
you seem to be quite, again, you seem to be well spoken and interested. I'm sure you can communicate where you're coming from, and if somebody's involved with you as a coach, I'm sure they're a mindful person. And
right. He's super he's about as mindful as they come, I think, with running. And but yeah, it's been an interesting process. Like, he's great, and he's probably like bangs his head on the table every time like something from me pops up, because I don't mean to be difficult, but I am trying to find that state, because for me it really has to be a flow, an inner flow. And sometimes I come up against it where I'm like, how do I do that and follow directions?
If we can figure that out, we'll solve the industry. Very much hiring a coach in any discipline is like cleaning all of your mirrors, and sometimes clean mirrors are terrifying. Just it's too.
I mean, it's showing me more about myself. Yeah.
Exactly. You can because when you're not hiring a coach, you can leave the dirty mirror. You don't have to really.
Fully.
If I don't want to look at my bad metrics, I just won't. I'll just go running.
Yeah.
But with a coach, you can't do that. So.
Yeah.
I'd be perfectly happy to chat with you offline.
That'd be fun.
Anybody else? I know Jack, you're in charge of all the things. How are we doing, buddy?
We're doing good. I actually have one question for you, Katie. I can't use the Q&A because I'm the host. I'm going to ask you live here.
Okay.
I'm going to bring it back to running a bit more, which is, it's related to your whole experience, I think. But I'm really curious to hear about kind of I'm thinking about your timeline a little bit as a runner, and kind of what running kind of looked like for you before your dad's illness and death, and after. And I think a lot of what I heard today was you talking about kind of post or during and post your father's death, but I'd be curious to see how it transformed over time, you
Oh
as a
yeah.
runner and how you approached it.
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I've always been an athlete, and because I always ran as a kid, like around the block or with the Sony Walkman, like as a way to write stories. Running's just something I do, and I would go out for an hour run, or when I worked at Outside on Staff, my friend Faith and I would run like 2 days a week. At lunch, we would sneak out and run for an hour on the roads. Mostly, though, running is really like a way for me to get into the mountains. So I write about this in Running Home, but like right early on when I moved to Santa Fe in 1995, wow, to work for Outside, I would run up this mountain called Atalaya in town. And that was before like I ever saw anyone running up the mountain, and I would just run up the mountain as a way to like process my writing, sort things out. I'd broken up with a boyfriend. It was like heartbreak. And so I had a daily relationship with the mountain and with running. I would enter races like just on a whim, kind of like that first 10K, just kind of last minute sign up. Oh yeah, I'll do a road half in Albuquerque. What was that about? I don't know, but I finished second, and I was like, whoa, half marathon, like on a pavement. I did Imogene Pass Run, which is a pretty famous mountain run in California. And like, so about once a year I would race. But I think when I would come up against the race, I always usually did really well. But I got afraid that like, if I did really well, and then I got attached to doing well, then my running, this is sort of existential, would become about trying to win, not writing and creativity and inspiration. And so I was protective of it. And I think that's why I didn't race that much, was because I didn't want to just care about winning. Which is really easy to do. Like our egos really get involved in that. And it's like, oh, you won? Okay, but next time you better win and run faster. And like running means too much to me to have it go down that road. So I was really protective. And then I think my dad's death changed that, in that there were higher stakes for me running, which was like, oh, I have to get through this really hard time. And then I was so curious about ultra distance, and I didn't feel as much at risk in the way I just talked about with ultras, because there's so many variables. So no two races are the same, and like, you can't be like, I'm going to do this in this time. And, there's more leeway, and I didn't think I would ruin it for myself. And so far I haven't, but back to the question of being coached and not, and how much to race or not, or virtual race, like it's always for me, like preserving the joy. Central. Like I want to run until like I'm, the day before I die, and I want to write until the day I die. And so I need to like preserve the joy of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was wonderful. I was just really curious about your kind of your transformation, and it sounds like the your results at like Leadville and some other races were after your dad's death, and I was just curious kind of how that shifted your mindset about how you looked at running.
Yeah, it just made me more willing, I think, to like step into my life. And I have a moment that I write about in Running Home, which is like, oh, I realized like I am going to die. Like probably not of like that weird elbow cancer I was afraid of, but like someday I will. And so I might as well live before I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that means like entering these races. And ultras are also just like more my style than like road marathons, because they're just low key and like cool people. And like, I'm such a minimalist, and like, let's not make a fuss about stuff. And so it was a natural place for me. But I will say, I forgot to mention, this is a major moment for me in my running, and a part of a chapter in the book is that I ran, I accidentally ran a marathon with Dean Karnassus in 2007. And that was this sort of, it wasn't like chronologically the turning point, because I wouldn't then, sort of use what I'd learned from Dean until I didn't really start running ultras until like 5 or 6 years after, but I ran this marathon with Dean. He was on his 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days kick. And he was doing the New Mexico one, which wasn't a real marathon. I mean, it was in distance, but it wasn't an event. He and the North Face had to create an event.
Mhm.
And Outside Magazine was like, hey, do you want to write this profile about Dean running this thing? And I was like, sure. And so I called Dean, and because this is the kind of writer I am, I'm like, well, of course I'll interview you while you run, like that's just the story. And he's like, okay. And I said, I'll just meet you like 6 miles before the end. And Dean didn't even miss a beat. He's like, no, meet me at the start. And I was like, okay, cool, Dean. If Dean says that, you're like, all right, Dean. And I said, but I'm definitely going to peel off after like 5 or 6 miles for sure. I mean, I think the longest I'd run was that Imogene race. It was a year before. Like, I wasn't trained. I mean, I was in my way running like an hour a day, and Dean's like, okay. And so long story short, I show up, I've got the like tape recorder around my neck, the diligent reporter. I'm interviewing him as we talk, as we run. We're not doing a fast pace because he's doing this every single day. So I could just like, it felt good to me. And we were talking, and he was so sort of engaging, and like the stories are told, like, which everyone's heard, I'm sure. He would like order pizza on the fly, and, in his very captivating way. And, all of a sudden we get to this point, and we start going the other direction, and we've reached the 13-mile turnaround. And I was like, well, I'm screwed, because now I'm committed. Like I'm not peeling off early because I've still got to get back to my car. And I frankly didn't even really think I needed to, because I felt so great just hanging out, running with Dean. And, Dean told me his secret, which is not a secret, but he's written about it extensively, and I write about it, is that, he's like, you can always go farther than you think you can. And that little nugget, it was like those things in our life that happen at a certain moment, but then actually don't come to fruition, or like they're working inside of you and you're unconscious for years. And I will say, after I ran that with Dean, like I had been thinking about quitting my job, and the two aren't really related. Like, cause it was not like I quit my job at Outside to go run full time at all. I mean, I still don't run full time, but his thing about like, you're stronger than you think you are, you can go farther than you think you can, was what I needed to hear to give me that little nudge to take that leap to become a full-time writer. And then, but his ultra mindset as pertained to running just sort of like went into my subconscious, in one of those little like cracks in your brain that you think you don't remember. And then, lo and behold, my dad dies, I'm running longer and longer. And like his words came back to me, and I was like, oh, I think I'm going to run an ultra. So life is so funny that way. And that's why I really believe in being so open, because you don't know like where something's going to lead you. And that's kind of one of my mantras, is that like everything leads you to the next place. It may not be the way you think it's going to be, but it's leading you somewhere. And so even like a sucky race, is going to take you somewhere. You just can't see it right now. You just have to trust that like you're going in the direction.
It's something great to keep in mind, I'll tell you.
But Dean is awesome. And like, he's since been in touch about my book, and he's a huge fan. And like, recently he sent me a photo of that day from our marathon in Albuquerque. And like there's a photo of me crossing the finish line, and our hands are in the air. And it's just like the expression on my face. Like, I remember it like not feeling hard at all. But then I look at that photo and I was like, you don't look that comfortable.
Yeah, it ages, doesn't it? The suffering.
And then like the clothes, and just like the whole mood is so like 2006. It's funny.
Well, it's cool to hear that, I'm not going to say that the words that he shared with you changed the way that you viewed running, but he offered you a new framework to take into the way you run. And if I can humbly offer it, just in the little bit that I've read of your work over the years, I'm optimistic that your book can do that for other runners. So thank you for writing.
Oh, thank you, Chris. That's really sweet. Yeah, I felt that. Like, a lot of people who have come to the book aren't even runners. They've come because they're going through a grief, or they're writers, or, but a lot of people in grief, and then obviously a lot of runners too. And so it's so inspiring to see it touch so many people. And I will say, like, this is what I say to everyone I speak to, and I don't really even need to say it to you guys because you're all runners, I'm sure, but like, it's cool if you're not a runner too. Like you could really, I feel like this, you could take, anytime I say running in this book, like you could take it and cross it out and put your own thing in there. It's really about doing that thing that really moves us and doing it from the inside out and doing it like because we're moved and it's that intrinsic joy. And whether it's running or like dancing or piano or whatever, like you know it when you find it. And you're not doing it for the results. I mean, it's nice when the results follow. And if you're doing it from that inner place, they likely will. But you don't have to be a runner to love it. But obviously you guys are runners. So I think you'll love it even more.
Thank you very much.
That's my plug.
I really appreciate you coming on to share all this stuff with you, or with us, excuse me.
It's been great. I love talking to groups, and I always I just get insight when I talk to readers. And if you haven't read the book, whoever's watching, like I said, go out and grab a copy. It supports an author like me and your bookstore. And it is available on Audible if you like to listen while you run, which I like to listen to things when I run. I don't do audiobooks that much, but I do a lot of podcasts. So
cool. One of our club members just set a fastest known time in the Sierra, and she's very fond of long form podcasts while running.
Yeah. I think they're good. I'm always trying to get new podcast, like I love to know what people listen to, but so, and like I said, if anyone's interested, I'm happy to sign book plates. And even if someone watches this after the fact, just shoot, I guess, Jack or Chris an email with the info, and I'll inscribe it however you want. Or if you want to buy a book for someone else, it does make a good gift. It's a little more relevant for everyone these days that we all have, we're all dealing with loss in some way or another. And that uncertainty of life, you know, and having a thing like running or whatever your thing is a really good sort of anchor in these times. So I'll inscribe it to whoever you want.
Well, thank you. And yeah, please just go, if you are interested in that, please go to DonnerPartyMountainRunners.com and you can email us there. We'll connect you with Katie and take it from there. If you are not a member of the club and want to join, because this stuff like this is awesome, please go to that website and sign up. You can go to, Katie, forgive me, your book is running home, but I don't have your website written down.
Yeah, great. I was just going to say that too. You can find a lot of podcasts I've done, and anything about me and the book on katiearnold.net. And then I also want to say that right before the pandemic started, I led my first running and writing flow retreat. And so for anyone who's interested in running or writing in any stage of the process, so you don't have to be like, people will be like, I'm not a real writer. Well, everyone has stories to tell. So, and it was a fantastic retreat in Utah. And obviously everything got put on hold after the pandemic started, but I'm starting to develop one for New Mexico, and they're really transformative. It's all about creating daily practices in your life to support that flow state so that you can put that flow into your running or athletic pursuits or your business, if you're an entrepreneur, or your writing or your art or your parenting. And they're easy things like, you know, meditating a few minutes a day. I'm big into just like cruising around on my bike. You know, it's just those states of joy and play. And we all need more of that. So that will be up on my website. And then obviously follow me on social media at Katie Arnold on Instagram and at Raising Rippers on Twitter. And then I'm told I should say this, I'm so bad at like asking for things, but if anyone has read the book or when you read it, and if you are so moved to do this, doing a review on Amazon or Goodreads, I'm told really helps. So
yeah, if I can jump in there, I'm very fond of promoting that. I'm not tied to the reviews at all. Everybody listening, me, you, Jack, all of us, if it's a terrible something, we're going on there to write the thing.
Yeah.
If it's transformative, we'll tell everybody we know, but not the internet. Just check the
Just write it. I mean, it's like the world we're living in. And this is super grassroots, which is very appropriate. It's my style and kind of just like the ethos of the book, because it is a very just like it's an organic book that grew out of this inner experience. And so it's just grassroots, spread the word, you know, post a photo on Twitter, anything like that helps. There's so much noise in the world, especially right now, that to put a little love toward the positive is good.
And if I'm a musician, and so personally, I've seen this with a lot of musicians, and I'm sure it's the same with the writing community. I'm just not a writer, but now that's the only way you can interact with people. Like if your fans don't comment, rate, whatever, they might listen to your record or read your book every day, but you never know. And now we're more isolated than ever. You don't get to go to a book event and see all of them in person. Bands can't play concerts if you don't rate the thing or comment. They don't even know you exist anymore.
I know. It's such a numbers game too. It's like how many followers, you know, and I really try not to get caught up in the numbers, because I believe every single person, like that interaction I had with Dean, has the power to change your life, and you have the power to change theirs. And so, but yeah, if I hear from readers all the time, it's like the best thing as a writer to hear that your book has moved someone. And so thank you to anyone. If you can spread the word about the book, I think it really could be useful to a lot of people.
I'll put a bow on our event with this, because it couldn't be more timely. In our chat, the president of the Donner Party Mountain Runners, the esteemed Madam Diane Frederick, just wrote, "Katie, thank you for joining us today and sharing your story. I really enjoyed the book and look forward to hearing more from you," which is exactly what you said. She went out of her way to type the thing. Look at you. We did it.
Yay, Diane. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. It was just great to be with you. I love chatting, running, and writing, and the world we're living in. So just go out, do good things for the earth and each other.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Katie.
Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.